Honestly, this is the weirdest Alabama team I've ever seen. I started watching college football really in 2013, and at the time, Saban had a dominant team littered with star power all throughout the roster. For the most part, Bama football has been that same way ever since. Recently, they've had top-notch quarterbacks, first-round level receivers, superstar running backs, insane defensive linemen, and guys who are elite and at the top of their class. This year's team, though, has been unbelievably weird. Jalen Milroe's gotten better, but he's by no means a star. They have neither a star running back or a true go-to receiver. It's basically been a committee approach at both the running back and the receiver spot, and while the defense has been terrific, the only true star on the roster is Dallas Turner, but both Terrion Arnold and Caleb Downs are also up there. Not only is the roster and production weird, but Alabama lost at home to Texas, almost lost to USF and Arkansas, and then all of a sudden just figured it out. It was like nothing. They played multiple different quarterbacks, had everyone wondering if Nick Saban was going to retire, and then all of a sudden, they just figured it out and got back to their old Bama ways. They've clinched their spot in the SEC Championship and have legitimate college football playoff aspirations still. In today's video, I want to talk about the 2023 Crimson Tide, talk about the craziness of this season, why everything is working, how it all happened, and what I think will happen the rest of the year. But before we get started, if you love college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I could cover next. Now let's get started and talk about the weirdest Alabama team ever. So in order to talk about 2023, I first think we need to talk about 2022. Last year, Bama ended up having a somewhat odd season as well. Bill O'Brien was still the offensive coordinator, Pete Golding was the DC, and Bryce Young was still the quarterback. They had plenty of stars littered throughout the entire roster, and they brought in a couple of really notable players. They got Jahmyr Gibbs from Georgia Tech, Jermaine Burton from Georgia, Eli Ricks from LSU, and Tyler Steen from Vanderbilt. Couple that with a big-time recruiting class, and many were excited for Bama's 2022 season. As I said, there were plenty of stars littered throughout the roster, including guys such as Bryce Young, Emil Clore, Cam Latu, Henry To'oTo'o, Will Anderson, Kool-Aid McKinstry, and Brian Brandt. That's just to name a few. They were obviously picked to finish first in the SEC West, but the season didn't exactly go according to plan. They ended up beating Utah State in Week 1, before going on the road and beating Texas. That game was somewhat controversial, as there was a potentially dirty hit on Quinn Ewers, and many thought that if Quinn continued that game, that Texas would have won. But Bryce Young led them down the field, and they kicked the game-winning field goal. After that, they beat both Louisiana Monroe and Vanderbilt, before going on the road and beating Arkansas. In that game, Bryce Young was hurt, and Jalen Milroe would have to finish the day. They won 49-26, and then also survived against Texas A&M. Haynes King had a chance to win the game for the Aggies, but he threw the ball out of the end zone, and Bama survived. They're now 6-0, going into a nearly impossible environment. We had seen the rise of Tennessee football, and the Vols were the Cinderella team of 2022. In a game that I was personally at, Tennessee ended up having a couple miracle plays happen, Bama missed a field goal, and then Tennessee hit a game-winning field goal and won 52-49. This was the most exciting game of 2022, and unfortunately it hurt Bama. They'd now have to win out if they wanted to go to the college football playoff, and their next 3 games were not easy. They'd face 3 straight-ranked opponents and would come away with 2 wins. The wins came against number 24 Mississippi State and number 11 Ole Miss. Sandwiched between that was a loss to number 10 LSU. The game ended up going to overtime, and Jaden Daniels had a big touchdown run and then found Mason Taylor for the game-winning score. They lost 32-31. They lost on the road to a top 10 team and had to walk off the field through a crowd. They are now eliminated from the college football playoff, but would finish the year with wins over Austin Peay and Auburn. Everyone was seemingly forgetting about Bama, and in the typical Crimson Tide fashion, they destroyed number 9 Kansas State 45-20 to finish the year. Despite going 11-2, as I said, this was like the least talked about Bama team in forever, as they were truly just a couple snaps away from being undefeated, but it didn't end up happening. Going into 2023, there'd be a lot of changes. Bill O'Brien left, and Tommy Rees was brought in as the offensive coordinator. Pete Golding left for Ole Miss, and Kevin Steele was brought in as the DC. Bryce Young was gone at quarterback, so they now had 5 quarterbacks to rotate through to find a starter. Jahmyr Gibbs was gone at running back, so they had a logjam there. They still didn't have a star receiver from last season, so they'd have to sort that out once again. Will Anderson went off to the NFL, and pretty much everywhere Bama had a hole to fill. But there was still plenty of talent. Saban isn't huge on the portal, but he brought in a couple of guys who he saw with a lot of potential. He brought in former 5-star quarterback Tyler Buckner from Notre Dame, Maryland tight end CJ Dippre, and linebacker from Georgia, Tresman Marshall. They also returned plenty of starters who were ready to step up and become stars for the Tide. Many expected Jace McClellan to become the main back, for Jermaine Burton to become the superstar receiver, and then for Dallas Turner, Kool-Aid McKinstry, and Malachi Moore to to be the top-end defensive players. People were also excited for a couple of freshmen, including running back Justice Haynes, offensive lineman Caden Proctor, and true freshman safety Caleb Down. All those guys got a considerable amount of hype, and overall, it looked like everything was going to mesh together, and Bama was going to get back to their old self. Except, that is not exactly how the season started out, and for the first few weeks of college football, many thought the Alabama Crimson Tide dynasty was completely over. So going into the 2023 season, Alabama really wouldn't have much of a test, as they would host Middle Tennessee in Week 1. In that game, they won 56-7, and all eyes were on the Week 2 game, slotted against Texas. Steve Sarkisian used to be the OC at Bama, and Texas had a talented roster and high expectations for this season. How did this game end up going? Well, it really exposed Alabama. Quinn Ewers had the best game of his career, Jalen Milroe struggled immensely, and as a team, Bama was just off. They ended up losing 34-24, and Bama fans were not happy. But many were wondering, would Alabama bounce back and destroy USF in their next game, or would these struggles continue? Well, it ended up being the latter. Against USF, we actually saw a different quarterback play, as Tyler Buchner was the guy, but then he struggled so much that Ty Simpson came in. Through the first 3 weeks, we already seen 3 different quarterbacks take the lead duty, and they honestly were lucky to get by USF. While the Bulls aren't an atrocious program, this game was embarrassing. Bama ended up winning 17-3, but the game was close well into the second half. At this point, many were hitting the panic button, and through the first games, Bama was a complete disaster. But ever since then, Alabama has just found a way to figure it out. It started with number 15 Ole Miss, as it always seems that Saban has Lane Kiffin's number, and Bama won 24-10. This game was never really in doubt, and many were happy about this. Except there still really wasn't much star power. Jalen Milroe only had 1 touchdown and 1 interception in that game, and the passing offense just really had not been able to get going. In the next game, Bama would go on the road to Mississippi State, and there was really no expectation for this, as the Bulldogs were not supposed to be very good. Bama ended up winning that game 40-17, and while Milroe did have 2 touchdowns on the ground, he had still yet to really get it going in the passing game. After that, they'd play against Texas A&M, and just like the last 2 seasons, the game was extremely close. In this game, Milroe started to flash his potential, as he ended up throwing for 3 touchdowns, and Jermaine Burton had nearly 200 yards and 2 scores in that game. Bama ended up surviving 26-20, and they were slowly starting to find their stride. After that, things got weird again. Bama hosted Arkansas at home, and the Razorbacks have really struggled this year. In this game, Bama didn't really figure it out till the second half, and they ended up winning 24-21. They scored 24 unanswered, and I think this sparked a lot of confidence in the team. From there, they came back home and played Tennessee, and in revenge for the 2022 showdown, they ended up winning 34-20. While the game was close in the second half, Bama pulled away when it mattered. They had the last 5 scoring trips, and Bama was figuring it out. At this time, everyone kind of forgotten about the Tide. They already had a loss to Texas, they didn't have their normal star players, and they weren't really blowing teams out. That's why everyone had them going under the radar, and many were anticipating their game with number 14 LSU. At the time, LSU had the best offense in the country, and still actually might have it, but luckily for the Tide, they were able to shut it down for the most part, and held LSU to only 28 points. Milroe ended up having his best game of the season to that point, finishing with 4 total touchdowns. They ended up winning 42-28, and once again, Bama survived. For the most part, all of their games were close, but they were finding a way to win. They had slow starts against Arkansas and Tennessee, and only won by 1 possession in their road games against A&M and South Florida. But ever since the LSU game, Bama has finally just started to put it on. 2 weekends ago, they went on the road to Kentucky, and in this game, Bama put up 49 points. Kentucky is by no means a juggernaut this year, but it was on the road, and compared to how they've been playing road games earlier in the year, this was huge. Milroe once again had 4 touchdowns, and he was really starting to figure it out. He was not a typical pocket passer for Bama, but he was using his legs and really elevating the offense. This past weekend, they ended up beating Chattanooga 66-10, and with Georgia beating Ole Miss handily, the SEC championship was already decided 2 weekends ago. It's going to be Bama versus Georgia once again. It has honestly been an extremely weird season though. So far, Jalen Milroe has become the starting guy. Jalen Milroe is really starting to figure it out, as so far in the year, he has over 2,000 yards with 19 touchdowns and 6 picks. He also has 300 yards and 12 touchdowns on the ground, and while he's not a superstar yet, he is showing immense potential, and he could really build his stock in the next couple of weeks. At running back, they've still had a committee approach, as while Jace McClellan does lead the offense, Roydell Williams, Jam Miller, and Justice Haynes are also seeing plenty of carries. In terms of receiving, they still really don't have that go-to guy. Statistically, Jermaine Burton scored the most touchdowns, and Isaiah Bond has had the most catches, but this is just not the same pass-catching offense we're used to seeing from them. In my opinion, they really need a guy to step up here and continue to help this offense. On defense, Terrion Arnold leads the team in both pass deflections and interceptions. Both Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell have 7 sacks apiece, and Caleb Downs by far leads the team in tackles as a true freshman with 90. Honestly, right now, the most disappointing player on the roster is probably Kool-Aid McKinstry, and while he's still probably a top 10 pick, he's not emerged to the level that I thought he would. Bama has to go on the road to Auburn this upcoming weekend, and I don't really think this is going to be that difficult of a game. While you never know what will happen in Jordan-Hare, I think Bama wins this game pretty easily, and then has that huge showdown with Georgia. Right now, it'd be really hard for me to pick Bama to win this game with how dominant Georgia's been, but who knows, maybe they'll make it interesting. Georgia at times has looked vulnerable, but they always seem to find a way to put the hammer down in the second half. We'll really just have to wait and see, but this has been a really weird season for Bama. They're not blowing out teams, they don't have an elite pocket passing quarterback, they don't have a star running back, and it seems they are truly playing a more team-level approach. From almost losing to USF, to now clinching an SEC championship appearance, it's been quite the season for Bama. But what do you guys think? If you're a Bama fan, what the heck happened in that first month of the season? What are your expectations for the rest of the year? And how do you like the approach that Nick Saban's been taking? Be sure to let me know down below. Let me know what team, topic, player, situation I can cover next. Subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.